So I know that you've all probably been here the whole day, right? It's getting excited and emails piling up. So we're going to make this as fun as humanly possible. There's going to be a dance number in the middle, so if you pay attention, you'll miss it. You don't want to see me dance. We're live streaming, so it'll make its way onto something. Hi, Mom, by the way. So I'm surrounded by a ton of creative people that are up here on this panel. And when it comes to healthcare, I think that if we're going to quote people in the advertising industry, a former colleague of mine said something that was very poignant, which was, innovating in healthcare is easy because we could just look at what banks did last year. And unfortunately, it does seem that a lot of people take that type of approach when looking at creative for healthcare, or when looking at innovating in the healthcare space. Because it's a regulated industry, there's a lot of fear, right? But fortunately for us, there are warriors like those that are sitting on this panel right here that are fighting against the onslaught of stagnant and boring healthcare creative, that are fighting against B-roll of people in rolling hills and standing in front of their kitchen. How many people can make a salad? Like, how many people are sitting there making a salad on B-roll and commercials? So I'm fortunately joined by John Barker, founder and chief idea officer of Barker. So they said that I would let everyone introduce themselves, but this is a humble bunch. So I'm going to go ahead and read off just some accomplishments. So I did a lot of research on those up here. So John's a recipient of over 100 international awards during his 30-year career before founding Barker in 2003. He served at senior positions with Gray Worldwide and Sony Music. There's a ton of cool stuff in this bio, but the coolest, so I know that you're very humble, John is the recipient of a Grammy and an Emmy Award for marketing and is regularly featured in publications such as The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, Washington Post, Ad Age, and Crain's, and is a graduate of Yale. So welcome, John. If you don't have a Wikipedia page yet, I'm making one after this. I think he does. There's next up, Courtney Cotrupe, President, Partners+Napier. So Courtney champions a culture of insight-driven creative ideas focused on results. So her agency has been honored for creative effectiveness, including multiple Effie Awards in healthcare marketing, and is a 2018 Grand Effie finalist. My favorite part is that Courtney got her start at Ogilvy, which is a great agency. And since joining Partners+Napier, has led integrated teams in the healthcare space for brands such as Highmark, Bausch & Lomb, Mederma, Excelis, Blue Cross, Blue Shield. And now we're getting out of the agency world because we're really getting some movers and shakers. Moses Salami joins us, Director of Marketing Communications for Holy Name Medical Center, more than 7 years of healthcare administrative experience. And he is the Director of Marketing for Holy Name, which is a 361-bed acute care facility in northern New Jersey, residential hospice palliative care facility, and medical fitness center in Bergen County. This is where things get really interesting, though, because not only is Moses a marketing communications director, he's also John's client. So we get to get the raw truth right here. We get the client side and we get the agency side. So neither of them can blame the other for any of the issues that they faced. But as far as a creative panel, in order for us to actually talk about how exciting some of the creative that's being done in the healthcare industry is, we want to show, not tell. So we're going to start off with 2 videos, one from Barker and then one from Partners+Napier, just to show some of the work that we're going to be talking about today.
The physician that I was working with sort of breezed into my hospital room, and he looked at me and he said, "So what drug do you want to take?" And I said, Drug for what?" And he said, "Oh, you have MS." It was probably one of the worst moments of my life. I was on my way out, truly, I was on my way out. There was no way I was gonna live with an intense needle phobia and somebody telling me that I had to take a self-inject every other day for the rest of my life. I went to a seminar and I was terribly, terribly rude to this lovely woman, and I said, "There's only one piece of information I want from you. I need to know who the best doctor in the state of New Jersey is for multiple sclerosis." She really embraced me with her words that she was my partner in this, she was my coach, and that no matter what, it was going to be okay because the two of us were going to handle whatever this disease had in mind for me together, and we were going to fight it together. She really is at the epicenter of what's new in therapies and what's happening out there in terms of this disease. She saved my life. I'm not being figurative, I'm being literal. She literally saved my life. Because without her, if I had had the same experience with her that I had had with the last 3 physicians, I would not be standing in front of you. There's no way. So that's what I would say, and that I love her.
Hi, just a few questions. What's a BMI? Are bunions dangerous? Are carbs too bad? Is kale mandatory? Well, hot yoga or spinning?
Aquafit.
Better like the water. How much is too much water?
Doctor's Checklist, the easier way to ask the right questions. Free for anyone with Medicare. From Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. The official bird of Delaware isn't red. It's not green or purple. It's blue. Coincidence? We think not. Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, Delaware. This blue hen was hatched in Delaware and raised in Delaware. Do you think he wants to call someone outside of Delaware? Here's a hint. Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, Delaware.
We gave these people a t-shirt and a simple task. Tell us their real age, and tell us how old they really feel. These were the results. The average person over 65 feels 12 years younger than they really are. At Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, we're here to keep you feeling that way. That's why our new $0 premium Medicare plan comes with benefits to help you take care of yourself, like gym memberships, no-cost preventive screenings, and more. And to make it easier to find the right plan, we have a team of local advisors ready to listen to your needs and walk you through your options. By phone at 1-800-338-7200 or in person at local seminars, working hours, and more. Because Medicare shouldn't make you feel old. It should help you feel better than ever. Call 1-800-338-7200 today.
I found out 2 days ago that blue hens were real, by the way, because of that spot. Just to kick off, tell us a little bit about the work. This is for Moses and John. Tell us a little bit about This Place's different campaign, how to come about. We'll start with Moses. How did you kick off this process? What did you know you wanted to do? And then John, you can tell us how we got there.
Awesome. Well, I mean, as Michael said, Holy Name Medical Center is an independent Catholic medical center in Bergen County. And what led us to Barker Agency is we noticed we weren't connecting with our patients in the way we wanted through so many means, through print advertisement, billboards, digital. And we loved John's team just because they weren't originally in healthcare before. So we knew that they would consistently think outside the box. Within Bergen County, you can go 5 miles. There's a competitor in every direction. And you can look at all of our print advertising and cover up the logos. We all look the same. So we knew with John, it's funny, but we knew with John's team, we gave them the proposal, hey, come up with something, and they delivered a great product, something that was very vibrant and was a solution to like the flavorless marketing that we saw all around us.
So we've got a terrific head of strategy named Jason, and we are a data-driven creative boutique, and that's not normally words that you hear in the same sentence. But we really look for the insights before we look for the ideas. And what Jason uncovered through Mintel and through the 4As and through just extensive research is how different 2 things were. One is Teaneck, New Jersey, which is the location of Holy Name, and the second was Holy Name itself. Teaneck is one of the most diverse communities that you can imagine. You have everything from Orthodox Jews to Koreans, African Americans, and yuppie commuters all living next door to each other and getting along the way we're supposed to. but an incredibly diverse community, which also presents, I think, real challenges for a hospital serving that region. And we came across a quote from the CEO in a fairly obscure publication, actually. And we were reading it, and he said, I know that we're doing a great job when a patient walks into this facility and says, wow, this place is different. And it knocked me over, and I said, shit, that's the tagline. That's the tagline. And what I like about the tagline is that it's weird. It's weird. This place is different. We're not saying what it is, but we're playing off of that sea of sameness in all of healthcare. We're not saying we're number one in the cyberknife. You know, and what we love about this campaign is that this campaign is about the joy of living, not the fear of dying. And that's really what Holy Name delivers, is this sense of personal care and personalized communication that helps people live through these terrible diseases.
And I think that one really poignant phrase that Moses just mentioned, he said, we went to Barker because they weren't healthcare. And I think that that is an issue that a lot of us struggle with, which is that healthcare marketing from lesser people is so bad that people are avoiding it, and they're turning their backs on those that have done it to find something else. So Courtney, I know that you've done a lot of healthcare. How do you fight against that, and particularly in the work for Highmark and Excellus that you showed? How did you arrive at that? What's the insight that drove it, and especially within this confines of being a healthcare marketer?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages I think that we have is that we aren't a healthcare marketing agency. So we are a mid-sized integrated agency, proudly based in Rochester, New York, as Cindy talked about, where real people live and real people have experiences that are real when it comes to healthcare. So we draw a lot from outside influences. I think in the healthcare space in particular, and for Highmark, I guess I'll just talk a little bit about Blue Hen, because that's something that Cindy mentioned this morning, and you guys saw that there. The local aspect of it is really important when you're drawing insights and you're developing your strategy, because oftentimes, whether it's health insurance or you're talking about a healthcare system, they have very deep community roots. And so people have opinions and have experiences with the system and with the insurance that go very much deeper than maybe a traditional product. So for Blue Hen, which Cindy talked about, I mean, kind of our advantage was that they were in crisis, and that always creates opportunity to make big, bold decisions, because there was kind of no place to go but up. They risked losing all of their members. And so by digging into the Delawarean, which by the way, I knew nothing about the state of Delaware, and uncovering their deep passion and pride for the Blue Hen, it was kind of a happy accident that we were also Blue Cross Blue Shield, but it wouldn't have happened had we not been utilizing our strategy and our research team to really uncover that and then make the insight our own. And then once you know that, the creative kind of writes itself. And so I think that we were really lucky in that also in a very complex environment, we created something extremely simple. And there's irony in the simplicity of the Blue Hen when you're talking about a category that's so unbelievably complex. So somebody mentioned once it was kind of lightning in a bottle. It was one of those moments that we were able to just really capitalize on with a client that we had a lot of trust in, and a strategy that was based in data and an insight, and then that creativity that allowed you to just make that gut decision that it was going to be the right thing to do.
So on that note, so data and creativity has come up a few times, and if you Google data and creativity in advertising, you'll get 100 different articles penned by 100 different people about how they're using data to fuel their creativity, and you can't have one without the other. And if you're a cynic, you think it's just because their research division is not getting enough business. If you're an optimist, you believe it. How do we reconcile that? Because we know that both are critically important, but we also know that when it comes to creative, sometimes it's that gut instinct that might have a ton of data up here that you're not reconciling. How do you guys work that into your creative process? Is it this war between the rational and the irrational, the emotional and logical? So how do you reconcile that?
Sure. I mean, I think in a perfect world, they validate each other, right? We use data, I'm sure like many people here, we use it really to inform, to inspire, and then to optimize. And we use then the creativity piece of it is definitely the gut piece of it. But I think that the other aspect of it, we talk about at the agency, is you have data plus instincts plus trust. And it's the relationship piece that you build with your client that allows you to make those decisions where the gut is really involved. You know, one example of that was we call it the T-shirt experiment, where the piece of data that we uncovered was that, and they spoke about it this morning, people who are 65 years and older often feel 12 years younger than they actually are. And so we used that and really exploited it. But those people that you saw, we actually recruited from a Silver Sneakers Medicare program. We asked them to come blindly to a location, which I would never do as a real human, but these people were so sweet. And they arrived, and we literally handed them a T-shirt and told them what we wanted them to do, and that's what we got. And so we had a data piece that we were so confident in, it allowed us to be courageous in the creativity and our gut, and we had a client that allowed us to really do that and bring that to life because of the trust that we have built. So I would add on to that, just in summary, I think it's data plus instinct plus trust that's really the equation that we have to be thinking about.
You're giving away your secrets right now.
I know.
I'll just add on to that a little bit, if you don't mind. I don't know how you could be creative if you don't know what you're talking about. Robert Frost, the famous poet, was writing formal poetry during a period when free verse was the norm. And he was asked once, why are you not writing free verse? And he looked at the guy like he was the biggest idiot in the world. And he said, because free verse is like playing tennis without a net. And I think for us, the data is the net. The data are the lines on the court. We have to understand how to play the game. And then the real creativity of tennis or advertising is to be able to be creative within that box, right? People talk about out of the box all the time. I know it's a phrase, but being creative inside the rules is what really stands out.
No, I mean, just to add to what John and Courtney have said, for us, from the healthcare perspective, data is very important. Population health, knowing what diseases are prevalent in what communities. For instance, our cancer center, 70% of our patients from the cancer center are from northern Hudson County, which has various ethnicities from Colombians to people from Cuba, people from Dominican Republic. So it's no instance that if you look at the Displace is Different campaign, that we have people representative of that campaign, of that ethnicity in that campaign. It's by design. So we feel that data connects with the gut feeling. There's certain guidelines and parameters that you have to stay within, but within that, there's a lot of creativity, a lot of room that you can go with. And if something doesn't work, you try it again. Something doesn't work, you try it again. You always want to build that relationship and connect with the community. So we definitely trust our gut, but we also make sure we know what we're talking about, and we use our data for that.
I think that the phrase creativity inside the box is probably one of the best ways to describe marketing in a regulated industry like healthcare or any other regulated industry. And I know we're talking about data, and Moses mentioned resonating with the community, because what sometimes I think a lot of people forget are that these are real people. There's real people making really important decisions, which brings us to the fact of how do we make sure they care? How do we make sure that it actually matters to them? Because if you're in the middle of a healthcare crisis, does a splashy advertising campaign matter to you? And I think that the campaign that you guys launched really hung on that emotion. Tell me about what you keep in mind to check yourselves to ensure that you're not creating for creativity's sake, but you're creating for effectiveness at a very dire time for patients.
Can I kick that off? So perhaps obnoxiously, I tell new clients that you might be writing the check, but we work for the consumer. And I think that understanding and empathizing with the end customer is the most critical thing that we do, the most important objectivity that we bring, and it is based on research, but it's also based on empathy. And if you look at the This Place Is Different campaign, which, by the way, there's a website, thisplaceisdifferent.org, which if you want to check it out, you can see the full campaign. These are real people. These are people with flaws like all of us, and they're telling their stories in a way that, of course, is emotionally affecting, but it's also beautiful, and it's joyful, and it's empathetic, and it's real, and it's bright. I mean, we hired the photographer Ari Michelson, who's this extraordinary commercial photographer who never worked in healthcare a day in his life, and the entire campaign is so joyful and colorful, and it's about life. So I think you have to empathize. You have to understand the consumer. And the client may want to put 45 things in the ad, and the agency has to have the courage to say, you're screwing it up. Stop, right? We didn't have that problem with Holy Name, actually. They totally got it from day one, but it's about working for the consumer.
I would also say that, yes, empathy, but I think now, especially more than ever, the work has to exemplify some sort of utility for people. They have to get something out of watching or experiencing whatever you're wanting them to do. I'll give you an example. The first piece of work, the lady with all the Post-its on her, well, that came out of a challenge that Highmarket had, which is, if you're familiar with private Medicare, they actually get reimbursements from the government based upon a rating system, the STARS rating, which was alluded to earlier today. And you get your ratings based upon engagement and positive engagement that people have with the brand. Well, one piece of insight that we uncovered was that seniors in particular, when they get to the doctor and actually get into that sterile room, they forget what questions to ask. And I'm not a senior, and I forget what questions to ask, and then become very nervous, and it becomes a very pressure-filled situation because they feel like the doctor's trying to rush them out of the room. So instead of actually, to your earlier question, creating a splashy advertising campaign, our solution was actually a tool and a product, which was the Ask the Doc checklist. And so the entire body of work was based upon directing seniors to download the checklist to help them ask the right questions around their wellness visit. So we weren't only increasing engagement with the doctor, but also a positive engagement that is what led to the STAR rating, and ultimately Highmark did maintain the STAR rating that they were set out to achieve. So again, I think it's empathy, but through that, providing that utility, and then hopefully you can entertain. So in that case, we're able to take kind of a scary situation and bring humor to it, which I think is also really unique for the healthcare category.
I think consumers and patients, they want both. They want a splashy campaign, but they also want a great experience. And the campaign means nothing if we don't embody This Place Is Different here at Holy Name Medical Center. So any patient that comes in, you're not known as Mr. Johnson, you're known as Mike. You're not known by a medical record number, you're known by your first name. So the campaign is just an extension of what's already happening at Holy Name Medical Center. We give a great patient experience. So the campaign reflects that. So patients care about both, but from a healthcare perspective, the patient experience and the quality of care they do receive is of the utmost importance.
It's such a critical point that you can't slap paint on a building that's falling down. Right. And I think that we're up here talking about some really great examples of things that have done well. But where does it break down? Not just speaking about from the industry, what's going wrong? How did we get this reputation, how did healthcare marketing get its reputation for being stodgy, for being stagnant? And what are some missteps that you guys have seen happen in the industry, and how do you think we could fix it?
I'll take a shot at that one.
Solving the healthcare system, Ed.
No, I think it's the same problem with law firms. Doctors and lawyers are generally judged by their credentials, where they went to school, where they clerked, where they interned, et cetera. And there's a tremendous amount of competitiveness in the industry. There's a tremendous amount of arrogance in the industry, and there's a lot of pressure on institutions to say we're number one in this, and we're number one in this, and we're number one in this, and we're number one in this. And after a while, what they don't realize is they're just talking about themselves. And I don't know how many single people there are in the room, but if you go on a first date and the other person just talks about themselves the entire time, there's probably not going to be a second date. And so the industry's kind of talking to itself. And there is this sea of sameness around we're number one, we're number one, we're number one. And that's when you can take all the logos, you know, and just interchange them, cut them apart, and you wouldn't have, you know, any idea who's what. So I think that they just lost focus on what they're about, and that's healing people.
That's good for me. Let's move on.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, healthcare marketing is probably like the dinosaur in the marketing industry. It's so slow moving, you know, people are afraid of change or creative concepts, but you got to understand why it's so regulated. There's people are afraid of overpromising. You don't want to misrepresent a drug, a treatment. So there are guidelines and parameters in place. But once you understand those guidelines and parameters, you're able to work within that. And Barker's been doing a great job with doing that for us. So it's been great. Tough, but great.
This is like a live Yelp review. This is nice. This is
5 stars.
Someone's going to come out with a 1 star. There's going to be a heckler.
I could already tell who it is. I'm looking at him right now. So thinking tactically, not to give away secrets or cheat codes, but this is obviously, it takes a whole organization to get really good work done. What are your tips and tricks to make sure that it operates within a regulated industry, but that you have someone on board and that you're able to do the things that you do?
Well, for us, from the top down, having buy-in from our president and CEO, Michael Marin, has been extremely great, and from all of administration. They've really become ambassadors of This Place is Different. So it's been an easy transition for us presenting a new campaign. I believe everybody was ready for it within our organization, and we hit the ground running with it. And then from there, just understanding our patients was so important to us. We pride ourselves in being human. And once Barker presented something that really spoke to that, it really helped out. So we collaborated with our medical staff as well as our compliance department, because those two are very important to work with, because you're telling patient stories. So you want to make sure you're within HIPAA regulations, which is very important for healthcare marketers. Don't neglect that. But also just knowing as well, are you getting the clinical perspective right? Are you not misrepresenting a cancer diagnosis, a cancer treatment, or the recovery? You got to be careful when using words cancer-free or cure. And having our medical staff and compliance on board really helped us to not misrepresent, what's going on with our advertising, but actually show what's happening in the here and now with that patient.
So I'm really interested in the situation before this work. So for any work that you do, what do you find is the impetus for change? Because it does seem that for the work with Holy Name and then for the work for Highmark, there was a moment. There was a moment where we realized we had to do something different. What was that situation? How did you or your clients get there? And how can we inspire that type of action elsewhere?
Well, it's interesting you said that, because John's team actually reached out to us a few months early. So John's team saw something interesting about Holy Name, so I'll let him expound upon that a little bit. And it also inspired the change that we went down with the new campaign.
I think it comes to something that Courtney talked about as well, which is, when an organization finds itself in some type of competitive crisis, right? In Holy Name's case, Hackensack Medical Center, huge competitors, 5 competitors within 10 miles, yeah, and so forth. And I think it ultimately comes down to what I call brand courage. And, I think probably the case with Blue Cross, as well as with Holy Name, is that the clients had the courage to want to be different. You can be the best agency in the world, and if the clients aren't willing to go there, if they're not willing to push it, if they're, and I'm sympathetic to this. People have mortgages, they have kids, they've got lives that they have to live. But I think that when you get a title like CMO, or when you get a title like head of marketing, there's a responsibility that comes with it to guide your organization out of the sea of sameness. I can tell you that Holy Name was extraordinarily brave in what they allowed us to do. and they challenged us to even push it further. And when you get a great client, I mean, great advertising starts with great clients. It's that simple.
Yeah, I don't know that I've exactly that, and we've been talking about it. I think one of the things that we've done is we've tried to create a common language with our clients that helps them take risks. So we firmly believe that creativity can be an economic driver for brands. And one of the things that we've done is we've actually coined a word, effectivity. And yes, it's effectiveness and creativity smashed into one. But with that is actually a scale, an effectivity ladder. And what it is it's rooted in research that was done over in the UK, thousands and thousands of creative campaigns that says that, I think you guys are probably familiar with it, creativity can be 11 times more effective than other work. And essentially, it says that actually if you create work that is cliche or boring, which is lower on that ladder, you can actually damage a brand if you spend a lot of money in media against it, right? Versus if you're creating work that is fresh or original, or you think about like what Always did with Like a Girl in terms of contagious work, the opportunity is that much greater to actually achieve the ROI you're setting out to achieve. And it's a tool that we've used, this effectivity ladder, to create constructive conversations, kind of make the subjective an objective discussion. And so we're all kind of jumping in together. So it doesn't feel like it all just rides on a CMO's shoulders. I think that's the other piece of it, is that really having the dialogue so that everybody has skin in the game, and empathy for one another, and also anticipating your plan B. And that's, I think, a big piece of being able to take creative risks.
Beautifully said. I should have done this at the beginning to get a sense of the people in the room. How many, are we agency folks? Are we more on the healthcare system side of things? Show of hands for agency folks. Okay, so it's mostly agency side, and then show of hands for the other side, the healthcare system or insurance side. All right, awesome. All right, so now we're going to ask really hard questions. We're going to solve drug pricing. No, I'm kidding. So some of the work that we've showed, obviously because it lends itself best for video, was video content. As we enter into emerging channels and new channels are obviously popping up, patients are really looking to interact with different brands in different ways. What are some examples of things that you've seen or done on newer channels online that directly interact with patients? How do you do it in a responsible way? And how would you like to continue to see it evolve?
Well, one thing is, and I didn't realize there were so many agency people in here, kind of talking to ourselves. But you know, we're no longer in that captive audience world, right? You know, there used to be 3 broadcast networks. Everybody watched them all the time. The 60-second commercials, and you basically just sat it out, toughed it out. And now we've got, you know, the competitive set for really engagement or attention is almost infinite. There are studies that something like 72% of people are multitasking while they're watching television. In fact, they're not even watching television, they're watching their laptop or their tablet or YouTube or what have you. So we've really got to earn it. We have to earn it these days. And now we've got these shorter units. And the shorter units are really interesting, particularly in a regulated industry, you know, where you have fair balance and so forth. I mean, what are you going to do, 3 seconds of disclaimer on a 6-second spot? That just doesn't work. So one of the things, I mean, actually we share one client in Bausch Health, and we're working on a project right now where we're focused on 6 to 8 second spots for a pharmaceutical product. And trying to make it interesting and trying to make it actually funny, because humor does cut through, and still stay within that safe space. That is a serious challenge, but we've got to look at these shorter units. I mean, I'm sure everybody loves Geico. I mean, who doesn't? But the pre-roll campaign that says, you know, can't skip this ad, it's already over. It's brilliant. But, you know, how are we going to do that in our own space? Because we're competing with literally everything in the world happening at the same time. So.
Yeah, I think that I love the discussion this morning actually on DTC brands. It's something that I follow. I get a lot of inspiration from. In particular, I love like what Hims is doing and Roman and how they're just completely changing the conversation around men's health and wellness. Are you guys familiar with Hims? Yeah? I mean, it's basically, somebody said it this morning, it's the same conversation, but it's told in a completely different way. And it's a model it's a product, right? So Hims is all about accessible products as well as they provide content. It's more of like a lifestyle brand. And what is it, 1 in 10 men, I think, are afraid to talk about their health with their doctor or some statistic like that. And so it's creating a dialogue through a product that happens to just live online. It's kind of like Goop for men in a way. And I just think that there's a lot to learn there. They're building an entire community around social. They're building a whole community around content. They're actually almost more of a media platform when you think about it. And it's obviously very difficult for a brand like a Highmark Health to do that in particular, but we can learn things from it in terms of how they're talking to that audience, because that same audience is also buying our products. So I think some of the DTC brands are doing things that are really interesting, that are non-traditional, so to speak, that we can all learn from.
And just to add to that, also, you know, at Holy Name we live by content is currency, and just being able to produce a lot of content is very important for patients and the consumers. A consistent message. So as we brought on Barker, just having so many different pieces of a campaign, it goes beyond a print ad. That's prehistoric, you know. It goes into digital, it goes into the billboard, it goes into consumers' home, to their smartphone, to what they're seeing on TV, to their tablet. So we had to make sure that everything we do lives online, you know, from starting an Inspiration Health blog where we have blog posts about healthcare issues and things going on that people can read and share. It's all about shareable content because that increases the reach into the next person and could turn into an appointment being made back to the hospital.
You're a really good client. I can tell. I love that you brought up Hims and Keeps, because I think they found a way to retarget me based on my insecurities. Don't know how they figured out what's going on inside my head. But it's just, somebody's just looking at my photos and just sending me ads. So know that there's so many agency folks here. We're talking about having great clients, right? And we talked about, you know, if the client's not on board, I'm sure there's a ton of people in this room saying, my client will never go for that, but my client won't do that. How do you get them to? How do you get them there? How do you show them the light and make them believe what you're saying?
Well, the first thing is we offer to box with compliance. Lots of profanity flying around and so forth. I think, you know, Courtney said it very well when she talked about, you know, giving them the framework to take risk, giving them the ability to go down that road. The way we typically do it is, you know, and by the way, OTC is very difficult as well. I mean, because there's a lot of stuff that you can't do there, just like DTC, farm, et cetera. But what we do is we try to get clients to fall in love with something. We have this technique that we call informed rapid prototyping, and it's instead of death by PowerPoint, we just get to a certain point where we have a feeling about what we're trying to say, and then we just start knocking the hell out of it, and we'll do 10 different ideas, 10 different campaigns, and then we'll come in and we'll see, can they fall in love with this? Can they say, oh my God, I wish we could do that? And that's when we say, well, maybe we can. And we'll be there every step of the way. We'll fight with you. We'll fight alongside you. We'll test it. We're huge believers in research. But it's a lot easier if it's not abstract. It's a lot easier when, you know, you show some people this gorgeous piece of chocolate cake and they say, I want that.
I think that it really is an issue that plagues us a little bit. There was a phrase going around Ogilvy for a little bit that was, shut up and make it, which was, we talk ourselves so much into a box that we say, oh, we got to prove the concept and we have to work our way, we sell it. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes if you have the data and you have the insight, you just shut up and make it, and something great could come out of it. Or even if it's not great, it can inspire something else that's great, and once you start to see it in the real world. So I think that it's an incredible point.
Michael, we really need to get to some audience questions.
Oh, I didn't realize you guys were allowed to do that.
Yeah, they're allowed to do that.
I thought it was like a zoo exhibit.
We let them do that.
Okay. Because I ran out of questions a long time ago, guys. They're just...
Oh. Jeff,
Hi.
then we have one in the back.
Hello. Hi, I'm Deepika from Bristol Myers Squibb, so not on the agency side. I work in R&D, and some of the challenges that you have with unbranded drugs is budgets, and you can't have the same type of look and feel as a commercial approved drug. So my question is, how have Courtney and John kind of navigated that? And kind of a secondary question for Moses is, have you noticed if different type of creatives work for different audiences on different platforms for your hospital?
I'll speak to, I guess, your first question. And I don't work in the, we don't do work in the pharma space in particular, but I can address the budget question. I think it's actually a misnomer that you need big, big budgets to be able to do great work. The work that you saw, the Blue Hen work, this year not only won an Effie in the healthcare space and was a grand Effie finalist, but also won in the small budget category. So I think that there are ways to overcome it. Also, just to speak briefly about regulations and disclaimers, Cindy actually alluded to it in terms of the hen. You saw it was kind of gray, it had blue feet, but it wasn't. So we actually wanted to color correct and make the hen blue, and there was a lot of debate and controversy about doing that. And so we had a little bit of fun. We knew the rules, and so we broke them. So we actually created a disclaimer at the bottom that said no hens were harmed during the filming of this. We love blue hens. We would never do that. So I think that, again, you have to, you talked about it earlier, it's the freedom of a tight strategy. And it's the same thing, that the regulations put you in a box, but in a way, it kind of allows you to think just more clearly. So that's the way I would address just your first couple of points in regard to pharma. I'm hoping somebody else can speak to that because I have no idea.
I'll just jump in a little bit on that one. We love, I shouldn't say this, we love small budgets. And
we'll take the bigger ones.
That was the right response, actually. We love small budgets because we get to tell our clients, well, then you certainly can't afford to be boring. And what we find is that very often it's the lower budget campaigns that can be breakthrough. You know, can be really creative. So, I mean, that's the first place we would go with a challenge like that. And then, of course, we will have to learn why we can't do X and Y and Z and so forth, but then we'll come up with Q. But no one can afford to be boring.
And to answer the second part of the question, we look at the data. We look at impressions, likes, followers, seeing what the post does, what the reviews are. But also when you want to know if it speaks to a certain community, that's where in healthcare we call cultural competency, understanding the culture. So if we're making an ad that's for the Korean community, I don't speak Korean. I know I'm going to speak with my Asian Health Services and make sure I have their buy-in. Is this correct? One thing to note about the Korean community, you can't write anything in red ink. Why? Because it represents death. Now, I wouldn't know that unless I'm collaborating with Asian Health Services that understands the community, and we could come to an ad that makes sense for the community. So you always want to make sure the messaging you're putting out there is appropriate, and definitely collaborating with different departments in the hospital helps us work better. So.
And I know that I'm technically not a panelist, so I shouldn't answer, but I do have a lot of experience with pre-launch drugs for pharma and for BMS in particular. And I think that when you're dealing with a pre-launch drug, it's very much about embedding yourself in the community. I might not be able to say much about this treatment right now beyond the data and beyond exchanging the science, but I can say a lot and participate in conversations and learn a lot and be a part of this disease category so that when I do launch, I have something to say and a reason to say it, and it's not because I now have a drug, it's because I've cared the whole time. And being able to lay that foundation from a pre-launch perspective when you're in clinicals is really important, especially when you're dealing with such serious conditions like BMS deals with.
We have two more questions, one back here and then in front.
I'll stand. Hi, I'm Nicole Alexander with Saatchi & Saatchi Wellness. The even worst part of creative for healthcare is working in HCP specific. So what do we do to help make all of this targeting our HCPs, even better creative, which is so limited?
That's a great question. I think it's really, really tough. We, in terms of like with the Ask the Doctor campaign, one of the things we did there is we actually talked directly to the offices about what was about to happen to engage them in what was going to happen before it happened. We did it, one-to-one, and it was pretty grassroots. But reaching them is really, really tough. And I have not the perfect answer for you. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, and really just trying to think about the headspace of where that HCP is with the exact thing that you're trying to talk to them about. I think sometimes we blanket them. Like I found that a lot in working on Bausch and Lomb. There was just kind of blanket when actually they have different specialties, they have different interests, they too are humans, and they care about certain things and are motivated only by certain things. So that's how we have found to be able to try and maximize it with HCPs.
One final question. Go ahead. Should be. Yep.
Hi, Ron Cohen, Out of the Blue Productions. We do healthcare all the time as a video production company, and I'm very jealous of you guys because you seem to get clients that really care and get the extra mile, because a lot of times what we face is the same kind of thing. People don't want to get out of the box, and it's difficult. My specific question, I guess, is there's two things. One is, when you're asked to do things like service lines, when you're being very specific, and again, I love the title of this. I was looking forward to this all day because the whole idea of getting beyond Slo-Mo smiles and adding creativity, your hands get tied a lot when they go, okay, we've got to sell a service line. We have to sell oncology. We have to sell a cardiology. So how do you get to add creativity to that when they're just basically saying, show our doc, show our service line? And the other question is, how do you work with people who want instant results? How do you work with clients who are looking for that quick payoff when you're saying, give me 6 months to show this works?
I mean, the first part of your question I'll speak to is a great question, and in probably any healthcare organization, you're probably going to deal with that same struggle, just the awkward stock photo, and you just paste the doctor's photo ID, you put it on an ad. And what really worked for us was working with our chief medical officer. That was key for us to get his buy-in, because he could probably fight the war for us where some doctors probably want their face on the ad. But also, from looking at the campaign, a lot of the doctors see why we went this route. It's not about them, it's about the patient. Sure, they perform the care, which is very, very important, but the end result is better care for the patient, and also just letting more patients know why Holy Name Medical Center is so great. And once we had that buy-in from our chief medical officer, our physicians and staff and the service line see that everyone wants to be a part of this campaign. That's the hard part. It's a good hard part, knowing which service line to advertise, how to manage that. So at first, getting some buy-in with administration, your chief medical officer, because that's very key. Every physician is going to want their face on that ad, but does it speak to the community? It probably may not. Not everybody may remember the physician's face, but they may remember what the essential message of the ad is. And that's what our goal is, to connect, to build relationships with each patient through each form of content that we put out there.
I would just quickly follow up to say that, the video about Leslie Ferrier was a service line, right? It was about MS. There are lots of, and Holy Name happens to have one of the finest MS centers in the country. But there are lots of ways to tell stories, as you in production know, and the best way is make them interesting.
I think that is a beautiful way to sum up the panel, make it interesting. And I think certainly that the three people saying next to me certainly made this interesting, so please, a round for them. Am I overstepping?
Michael, thank you very much. Guys, thanks very much. And if Moses helped you figure out how to tell doctors to check their egos at the door, that was worth the price of admission in a polite way.